Time now for our regular Saturday panel this afternoon. Ben Oaquist from the Australia Institute, as always, and from the Institute of Public Affairs, Evan Mulholland. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Evan, I'll go to you first of all on this question of the GST top-up that Bill Shorten is promising to Western Australia. $1.6 billion doesn't alter the GST formula, promising that it won't have any money taken away from any other state as a consequence. This is yet another example, is it not, of bad issues management on the part of the Turnbull government. They know what a problem it was as far as this year's state election was concerned. There was criticism from the West Australian Liberals about the fact that Mr Turnbull didn't genuinely address it. Since then we've had a budget. And anyone could see that this is the kind of thing that Labor was going to do. And now, yet again, you've got the government responding to an initiative of Bill Shorten's rather than vice versa.
This is a furphy rebranded with a focus-grouped name. We've seen $1.6 billion delivered by Bill Shorten, which he says will be over the next term of government. The last 3 years, the coalition has given a $500 million top-up. But I think what this really goes to is the fact that the GST formula probably will need to be renegotiated. There's a Productivity Commission inquiry underway that the government set up. Labor's WA Labor MP's submission to that inquiry was widely slammed as incoherent and just without any direction. So I think we should wait for see what the Productivity Commission says.
But isn't the problem here that whatever the Productivity Commission comes up, there's a finite pot of GST revenue. Unless it wants to abandon, that is, the Productivity Commission wants to suggest abandoning horizontal fiscal equalisation, then someone is going to lose if WA gets more. And already the government has recognised this as a problem because they have topped up WA's pot in any event. So.
Absolutely. I think Turnbull's idea that he had for 2 days before the last election of giving states income tax powers so they can be responsible for their own tax collection and their own services where they can raise money themselves was a good idea. I think the rest of the states see the issue, and it's not up to states like WA and New South Wales to subsidise poor-performing economic states like South Australia and Tasmania.
Isn't the vulnerability, if there is any, Ben, as far as this is concerned, that this is $1.6 billion extra that the Labor Party has to find? Now, there is an argument going on. Labor says it's got plenty in the pot because of the tax cuts it's not going to introduce if it wins government, but in particular the company tax cut for big corporations. But arguments about where's the money coming from are a problem for Labor in any set of circumstances.
I think oppositions always face that pressure from the government to detail where funding is coming from. On the other hand, Labor has set out a revenue agenda that is more ambitious, bolder and out earlier than usual. So potentially they're inoculating themselves from those attacks, because actually the attack that the government is running is not that they haven't got enough money in the kitty, but they've got too much money in the kitty. You've seen that attack from Matthias Cormann this week suggesting that there's a whopping great tax bill. Now, if the government can sustain that Labor's got a whopping great tax bill, presumably then the voters are left thinking, well, at least there's some money to pay for it. And in the current circumstances, where we're seen to have a set of rules that is favouring the rich with the inequality debate raging, Labor's probably on stronger ground than it has been in the past to be pursuing negative gearing, capital gains tax, family trust. It all seem to be tax breaks that pretty much a small section of society can benefit from. And now if they then can use that to promote infrastructure spending like Bill Shorten has today in a very fiery speech, well then it's potentially a winner on both sides. One, they get to tackle inequality through the tax system. Two, they have more money to spend on infrastructure and things that the whole community wants. I thought it was a good speech from Shorten today. He was very fired up. He took on the government over the issue of aspiration and inequality and economics, from to marriage equality, to Indigenous protected areas. He seemed pretty fired up and confident.
Yes, indeed. It was a speech in which the opposition leader didn't simply offer up a straightforward Labor agenda. He was also trying to redefine the political debate, and that question of aspiration was one of them, Evan Mulholland, where he was saying that aspiration for Bill Shorten meant, for example, the aspiration for anyone to marry someone they loved. Now, this is also, in terms of controlling the debate, controlling the message, and in particular with the same-sex survey coming up, is still a bit of a problem, I would have thought, for the government. If Bill Shorten is able to frame the debate, then that becomes harder for the government.
I don't think they can have both aspiration and inequality debate running at the same time. Both of them seem to be a bit of a furphy. I thought Matthias Cormann's speech was a ripper. He targeted the aspirational voters, and it's what we need to see from the government. We really saw him outline what they're going to hit Labor over with in the next couple of years, and Shorten seems to be branding himself.
Do you think it really works in Australia in the 21st century to liken what Bill Shorten's planning to do to what happened in East Germany before '89, before the wall came down?
He might have gone a bit too far with that rhetoric, but look, the Hawke and Keating governments, and to a greater extent the Howard government, were built on the ideas of aspiration. It's an Australian ideal that if you work hard enough in life, you can get ahead and you can be successful. What Labor is saying is that you can only work hard enough up to a certain point, then we're going to hit you with 50% of income tax rates, and I don't think that's sustainable. In regards to the marriage equality survey, I think people have accepted that it's happening. I think we're past the debate over whether the High Court will reject it or not. I don't think the High Court will reject the survey itself, and people accept that fact that they're going to have a vote on it. I mean, poll after poll tells us about 60 to 70% support having a say on it, and poll after poll show that about 60% of the public support marriage equality. So we should have both. Both camps have had their say, and will have their say in the survey.
Evan, were you surprised at the number of people who have registered to vote in what's barely a couple of weeks? 100,000 of them. This does suggest to me that this is an issue which has engaged and energised voters, and presumably young ones in particular, because they're the ones who are not on the rolls, in a way that I've not seen in recent times?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the more people that are enrolled to vote, the better. I would look past the fact that, or the suggestion that all of these people are maybe left-wing, maybe progressive voters. I know for a fact that a lot of church groups have signed up people by the thousands in lots and lots of electorates. So it's really either way, and a plebiscite's probably not my number one option for how we go about this. I think a parliamentary democracy is important, with people having a vote in Parliament, but we are having the plebiscite now, and good on people for taking advantage of that and enrolling to have their say.
And is there a danger, Ben Oaquist, for those supporting a yes vote of complacency now that we've seen this big take-up and in a sense a sign of legitimacy being given to this ABS survey? And also, while opinion polls are suggesting significant support for same-sex marriage, and also that the numbers of people who say they are actually going to fill in the survey is pretty high as well, that it's actually easier to say you're going to do something than actually to do it, and that this could mean a possibility that either the majority, if it turns out that way, in favour of same-sex marriages is not as convincing as would appear to be the case at the moment, or indeed that it could fail?
Well, I think if it fails, there'll be a political riot. I don't think it will be the end of the same-sex marriage equality debate at all. I think there'll be enormous pressure on those Liberals who had talked about crossing the floor to think about it again. I think it will rejuvenate Bill Shorten's campaign for saying that he'll legislate marriage equality in the first 100 days of a Labor government. So it is just a road point along the journey to marriage equality, which we will have within a year or two of Australia, or potentially a month or two, if all the opinion polls are right and the marriage equality vote gets up. I don't see this vote, survey, whatever, call it plebiscite, voluntary thing, call it whatever you like, is going to stop marriage equality. I expect a strong yes vote. You've alluded to those high numbers of people enrolling. I think they're more likely to be in favour of it than against it. And while Malcolm Turnbull it's hard for him and his side of politics to kind of claim victory for a yes vote, because they're not campaigning as strongly, not in the same united way as other parties are campaigning for it. I just put the counterfactual to you a bit. I know a lot of people are writing Malcolm Turnbull off, and he is struggling, but if he gets the marriage equality legislated by the end of the year, and if he can get the clean energy target legislated soon, he will have chalked up, well, not political victories, but he will have slayed Tony Abbott on two key areas. Now, if Tony Abbott is defeated on marriage equality, if Tony Abbott is defeated on a clean energy target, that, I think, puts to bed Tony Abbott forever and might give Malcolm Turnbull some clear air. It seems a long way off, but if the forces of the right are put down by Malcolm Turnbull effectively through these processes, he can think of resetting his political agenda.
So, Evan, is marriage equality, success on marriage equality and installation of a clean energy target, is that the way to the sunlit uplands for Malcolm Turnbull?
Well, this is the problem for Labor, right? They're saying that they're being on the Yes campaign, they don't want a postal survey, but if it does lose, hypothetically, I'm seeing every element of the Republic debate repeated. There's arguments over the model, there's arguments within the Yes camp of, you know, we don't want the plebiscite, we're going to campaign against the plebiscite in the High Court, we're going to be on the Yes side, we're going to boycott it. They're completely split, and it's sad to see. And whereas you've got a No campaign that's completely united, that's energising all sorts of faith groups and different communities.
That's not true. It's not true. The Yes campaign is energised. You saw the rallies in Melbourne today. Yes, there's a High Court case against a postal vote. As you yourself said, it's not a great system going forward, but I think they're being very clever. They're keeping on message. They're able to kind of say the postal survey plebiscite thing by the ABS is no good. But wow, what a big turnout in Melbourne today. All sorts of community leaders arguing for the Yes case. I think it's energised. I think it's going very well. I think the no side looks like a rabble.
And good on them, but you're getting the same things on the No side. It's great to see people participating in democracy, but I would caution that I'm seeing the same things that we saw in the Republican debate. And as a Republican myself, it's sad to see history looking like it's being repeated. Now, regardless of the outcome, both a Yes and a No camp need to accept it, just as the Yes camp will be demanding that the No camp accept the outcome of the survey. I think the Yes camp should do the same.
Yeah,
the Yes camp will be asking for a free vote in the Parliament, and that's all. They'll just be asking for, if the plebiscite gets up, a conscience vote and a free vote in the Parliament. They'll be arguing the same if it loses. I don't think they'll be arguing for anyone to accept it. They'll be arguing for a conscience vote, and we'll get one, and it will pass.
Tony Abbott's name came up a moment or two ago, and he's now finally admitted what was scuttlebutt, in fact, written in the Daily Telegraph at the time, that the reason he did not vote in a number of crucial divisions when the fiscal stimulus being proposed by the then the Rudd government was being introduced, the reason being that he was drunk at the time. Evan, this is not just poor form, but quite damaging, is it not, given that this was the most significant economic event of the first years of the 21st century, and whichever way you were going to vote, you should have been there as a member of Parliament rather than being on your back on a couch in your office.
Absolutely. I think Malcolm Turnbull was quite right to say it was unacceptable, but I think your general voter in Mulholland will see a human element to this. Our politicians are held to an incredibly high standard, having worked for the Abbott and Turnbull governments. You walk in sometimes before 6 a.m. and don't leave until late at night. You do have long days on the job, but it's pretty silly, it's pretty unacceptable. It wouldn't happen in the private sector. I think the voters of Warringah will scratch their nose, but I think, yeah, there's a human element to it, and your regular voter will probably shrug their shoulders and be a bit disappointed and move on.
And Ben Oaquist, on that front, was Bill Shorten and indeed Wayne Swan as well, trying to make a bit too much of it when they attempted to broaden this incident out into a general condemnation of coalition economic policy. It was one person who is now a backbencher, yes, had a significant role at the time, but no longer the person with any executive authority within the government.
I think whether Tony Abbott missed a vote because he was overtired is not a big deal, but it was a chance to look back 10 years later about the stimulus package and how good it was for the Australian economy. 10 years on, Wayne Swan's been on a little tour with former UK Cabinet Minister Ed Balls, partly sponsored by the Australia Institute this week, looking at 10 years on from the GFC, how well Australia responded, what a good stimulus policy it was, what good Keynesian economic policy was. 10 years later, we're still struggling in the aftermath of that GFC. Inequality is entrenched, but economic orthodoxy has changed, as we've discussed. So it was a good chance to debate that. And Mr Cormann got it wrong this week when he said, if you tackle inequality, you're a communist. In fact, if you tackle inequality these days, you're an economist. And from the IMF to the OECD, the Reserve Bank of Australia, are all talking about finding new ways of tackling inequality so that the economy grows. As we've said, it's no longer you need to grow the economy to tackle inequality. You need to tackle inequality to help the economy grow. And in fact, that economic stimulus package was a great piece of progressive economic policy, and the times need that kind of progressive economic thinking again. So while what Abbott did didn't really matter, I did think it helped highlight the economic debate and really how progressives are stealing a march on that, one, in owning the legacy of dealing with the GFC in Australia better than other countries, but now tackling inequality.
Now, just in the last few minutes, Malcolm Turnbull has taken to social media condemning the defacing of the statues of Captain Cook and also of Lachlan Macquarie in Sydney's Hyde Park, with the inscriptions which suggest that Captain Cook at least had discovered Australia. And a Facebook post, he says it's a cowardly criminal act, and I hope the police swiftly find those responsible, bring them to justice. Old history should not be burned any more than old statues should be torn down. Rather, they should be challenged and complemented by new histories, fresh evidence and fresh monuments. Very, very briefly to you, Ben, first of all, this kind of behaviour is of no benefit in terms of anyone's memory and of the past, is it?
No, vandalism is no good, it's terrible. But I hadn't caught up with those comments from the Prime Minister till just then, and they seem sensible. Matthias Cormann, on the other hand, earlier today, saying it was part of some kind of leftist conspiracy, was over the top. these statues do need challenging. The history around them needs challenging.
Well, the Prime
they
Minister's
were
suggesting
some of
that
these people.
very quickly, Evan.
I would say, Ben, that these statues capture a moment in time. The Captain Cook Memorial is a British interpretation of the British discovery of Australia. I think we need to look to our British institutions that made this country great. And I agree with Keith Winchuttle. Perhaps we need to have an additional plaque recognising that Indigenous people were here tens of thousands a year beforehand. I know I'm in favour of having more statues. I think we should have more history celebrated because history is knowledge. And what we're seeing in the United States with statues being torn down by left activist movements is so sad.
Look, we will have
History
to...
needs to be reinterpreted.
Ben Oaquist, I really enjoyed your time. Sorry that we are so short. It is an important issue and I'm sure we'll come back to it. Evan Mulholland from the Institute of Public Affairs, appreciate your time as well. Thank you very much to you both.